Are we going to appall you with something confidential and disgusting? Let's hope so, because that is what you really like. Unconfessed crimes of buried wickedness. If that is what brings you to us, the prospect of hearing horrors, you shall not go unrewarded.
I don't believe it. The whole city is talking. You hear it all over. What a story. What a scandal. What a comedy. What a tragedy. Incredible. I don't believe it. Who can believe it? What horrors have you heard? Tell us.
Greetings, podcast adventurers. How are you? This is a bonus special edition little episode that'll be partnering with our Robert Mugabe timeline and breakdown. It's a bit overdue. It's actually long overdue. Apologies for that. But logistically, this was a bit of a nightmare to put together. In this episode, you're going to hear from Denis, his wife Faye, and their daughter Cal. Loveliest of people. So down to earth and hospitable. This was recorded at their house. They were nice enough to invite me up there. I went along with Jack's mother, who is how we made this connection. So Denis and Faye grew up in what was at the time Rhodesia, would become Zimbabwe. They witnessed firsthand the whole rise to power of Robert Mugabe and whatnot, and what it was like living in that region at the time. So I wanted to get together with them and have a chat about what it was like and tell their life story and whatnot. They're quite elderly. It's outside, it's not a studio setting, it's just outside at their house sitting down. They were lovely enough to put on some sausage rolls in the oven and some tea and biscuits and that. So, there's a lot of bits where there's a bit where you'll hear a timer going off, and that's just, the sausage rolls in the oven and things like that. So, very humble, down-to-earth setting. Very gracious of them to sit down and talk with us. So, hope you enjoy it. Later, yo.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Shaun Jeffery.
Oh, okay. Why see?
You'll probably do a better job than me.
All right, could you put the sausage rolls in for me? Where are they? In the kitchen.
And there's some
And do the washing up while
and the
you're there.
ironing.
Can you see them?
I'll go that way.
I think it might be a good idea.
Poor girl.
We've just got to go in as they are.
I'll have a look at these.
20 minutes.
Supremely happy
So it's
childhood.
wonderful.
Yeah.
It was under Ian Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my first real window into politics was when we stood as 6-year-olds or whatever, and we formally sang our own anthem, which is Bach's Ninth, and we lowered the Union Jack, tossed it away. As I say, I was about 6, and then but we were all part of the same school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we declared UDI. You know that, eh?
Yep.
And we sent up the green and white instead. And that's what... Actually, we should have put a green and white out for Shaun.
Oh, we should have done.
Yeah, I didn't think
so. Yeah, it's too early in the morning, I think.
At 17, it dawned on me when a 17-year-old friend was killed, and that's when I started to feel fear for the first time.
Yeah.
He was only 17, that's terrible. But we were a stoic nation. We started doing things that we hadn't done before, we'd imported before. Things like making shoes, making our own chocolate, lots and lots of things we set up ourselves up.
The country itself set up like its own infrastructure again to be like, we're now independent, let's do our own stuff. And
that's it. And when this annoyed certain people like Pomeland,
yeah.
So there was a bit of toing and froing, but basically they imposed sanctions on us. Yeah, so
As they do.
Yeah.
It's the weapon of choice of like big governments and imposing like countries. They'll just be like, oh, if you don't do it, we'll put some sanctions on you.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt a little bit?
Yeah.
Sometimes the tins were wrongly labelled, and you thought you were opening up some rice pudding or some fruit of some kind in a tin, and it turned out to be quite different. We got to the stage where we took no notice of what it said.
What?
Fruit or what?
That's funny.
We went through a lot of mistakes,
Yeah.
In the sort
Or
of
go
teething
at the
process
last
of
minute.
trying to set it all up.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right.
Absolutely.
Couldn't get my arm through the sleeve, you see. It was a bit worrying.
Okay. And we were the breadbasket of Africa.
That's something that's common.
Yes.
You always hear that, yeah, Zimbabwe was the breadbasket for the whole of Africa.
Yeah, and Rhodesia, yeah. But I've just finished this down.
I'm happy.
What were we saying with breadbasket? Oh, of course now, no longer so. Now there's famine.
They
There's
can't feed themselves now.
They can't feed themselves or anyone else. There was just before a year before Mugabe got in, martial law declared.
Yep.
So we by the stage I was training in a hospital, and it was quite it was electric in there. I mean, for instance, when they shot that, I was working in casualty, and we were going to go off duty when we were told everybody's got to stay because a commercial jet's been shot down. So we all waited all night. Our forces couldn't find the aircraft. I don't know what I was leading
Well,
up
it
to.
was up near the lake.
Eh?
It was much closer to the lake than it was to Salisbury
Was it?
when it came down. Yeah,
Is that right?
that's
Well-
why they've had such trouble finding it.
There were a number of friends killed, and I saw an awful lot, not just because of my job, but because it wasn't dropping bombs from the sky. They actually had a habit of cutting your power at 6 in the evening before attacking. So you're operating in the dark basically, and that even to this day, I get funny feelings at the backs of my legs. The last post, certain things that set me off.
Yeah.
But whatever, I ended up. We broke martial law, curfews. We were so stupid. We thought we were invincible, you know. Then jumping on a bit further to the 70s or late 70s now, there was the Lancaster House Agreement.
Yeah, the Lancaster House Agreement.
Which you'd know, and we were concerned about it. And I knew the daughter of the Air Marshal in charge of the Air Force and the Army, General Walls. It was just the way things had fallen. But we used to get quite a bit of information from them. Yeah. The Lancaster House, the promised they would look after us.
Yep.
We went free and fair election. People like my dad had in their minds a 5-year period, so that it becomes one man, one vote.
Yep.
It was never a black and white thing anyway, although the media
Would play it
we'd
like that.
have people like BBC come and throw lollies in a bin, and you can imagine what all kids do. They push the bin over and they crawl inside and eat the lollies. But this was portrayed in Britain as us starving them, and
Starving children,
they eat out of dustbins. So I guess that's why I was a bit, yeah. There was a lot of deceit with the UK, and then Maggie Thatcher came in, and when we were told that the wheels would come off, and they did come off, we were told to ring London and say it's not working. This is just coming from General Walls, yeah. I was in his house. And when the wheels did fall off, that's really when everything went bad. Yeah, and I don't know if he's still alive, Lord Soames. But
I've no
I
idea.
don't think he is.
perhaps my greatest fear at night was when Dad was out fighting and Mum was in in our house on her own with 3 other kids. And I'd be in the hospital and I'd hear that there'd been a rocket attack next door, and they'd killed people, had blown up a petrol station and all that. But all of this is not black and white fought against it. They were 80% of our forces were, for instance, were black.
Yeah.
So it was never a black and white thing, and we were happy. I mean, I nursed. When I first got to Britain, the question to me was, "How many blacks have you killed?" Yeah. Of course, I was very quick to say I probably nursed more blacks and cared for more blacks than you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Ugh.
So if we seem wary, I guess.
Yeah. It's
because,
so understandable.
Yeah.
It's just because I guess it's just like, it goes back to that if it bleeds, it leads mentality with the media, and they're like, oh, but we don't want a good story of people doing good stuff to each other. We want a story of, oh, look at this horrible atrocities that are happening, and we can portray it as such. If we throw some lollies in a bin and get the kids looking all impoverished, then we can go, oh, we told you this would happen.
Yeah.
And you go, you're just lying.
And we tried so hard to keep Mugabe out. We had a transitional period, which you'll no doubt know, Zimbabwe, Rhodesia.
Yeah, and there was...
And that was...
Well, because there was an election in, I think it was like 65 or something, which was to gain independence from Britain, and that was before they'd had the one man, one vote sort of system, and then as soon as they brought in the one man, one vote system was when Mugabe got elected after that.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the beginning of everything.
Yeah, it was terrible. I mean, no computers or mobile phones, so everyone that morning of the vote was being counted. We were all, even patients, everybody, the hospital came to a standstill. And
just waiting to hear what was going to happen.
Yeah, and then when we heard that Mugabe had come through, because he had subsequently we learned some awful thoughts about whites and women.
And he'd already done some things where he was brought in, I believe, by Joshua Nkomo into the ZANU party or whatever, and then he ended up ousting Nkomo himself, and he was like, I'll run this thing now, and they're like, mate, we brought you in to try and help our thing, and now you're kicking us out, and you're going to run the entire thing yourself. And it seems like I saw one person on an interview, just because everyone's talking about it again since he's passed away now, and someone was saying on an interview, they were like, do you think it was always there, or was it that like ultimate power corrupts, once you get in and you're like, ooh, now I can do everything that I wanted to do, or was that always there and he was just sort of waiting, like behind that sort of like hand of peace is like an iron fist of a tyrant that's like, you just wait, once I get in, I'll show you what my actual plans are.
And he professed to be such a religious character. You've seen the picture. There's one holding the cross in his hand, and the other's got an AK-47 in it. But
God guide my bullets.
So the Lancaster House Dad can tell you about, but Mum was very brave. I did stay over one night. The hospital didn't like us going far. So, and someone was trying to get into the house. Everybody had a system of one door in the house being locked, so Mum would lock it. But I was with her one night when we heard someone at the window, and Mum slept with a 3/8. Mum had to. Dad was out fighting.
Looking after the other wives. So
yeah.
My new baby.
Well, that's what happens, isn't it, when you volunteer?
Poor Faye.
like the firemen, I mean, they go out to fight fires, yet they don't worry what...
Their house will burn down or something while they're out, So,
and I suppose the last thing I was going to say to you is that the Rhodesia Broadcasting had that guy who sent the thing. What was an RPG, Dad?
RPG.
In Cornwall.
Machine gun.
He was.
Yeah.
Right now we're really upset. We're still in casualty. We're really upset about. It comes up that it's gone down. They've been found. Everyone's dead. And the number of, and they called it contact as a euphemism. That the government used it so that we didn't all pack up and leave, I think. But the number of people dying and being killed was being read by over the radio, every couple of hours.
And this is in just like rural conflicts and stuff that are happening that's causing, like the plane to come down. Is that just...
Oh no, they had a very modern weaponry.
SAM-7 missile.
So they're using surface-to-air missiles and where are they getting...
China.
Well,
China,
and that's what we were fighting against, really. That
communism coming in.
He was very much a Marxist,
Mm.
even though he'd been educated in England and Zimbabwe and other places.
He picked his Marxism up, I think, after he was studying. He studied, and that was one of the things that blew my mind as well. Is that he was educated in economics, like he had a degree in economics and things. And then towards the end of his reign, he's printing $1 trillion bills and that, and you're like, you studied economics, you could see where this is going to go.
Well, yeah. I suppose you learn to do the bad things as well as the good things.
So I think that's pretty well it from me. I mean, I can't listen to the last post.
Yeah.
I have problems. I have post-traumatic stress. I have problems with going to funerals. We just went to so many of our mates and we were in full regalia, white gloves, and it was just all very traumatic. And the last one I went to was the Dean, what's his name, Costa. Yeah, so I've ended up a little bit worse for wear. I was fine for the duration, and all these things that they put up, don't talk, walls have ears, that sort of thing. That it was a pressure cooker by the end, and when Mugabe was voted in that day, my friend beside me buckled. She actually went down. She was so shocked, and I've still got a record, an LP here, from a guy who gave it to me as a present, and on it said, "What did we fight for?" And that was 1980, and so it's a pretty poignant and electric time.
You can see because people just in that statement, you'd be like, people put so much in to build up from nothing, to build an economy and to be living where you were, to then you could see what's going to happen. You can see one domino fall and then the next one, and you can see all these events starting to snowball one after the other, and you just be sitting there going, oh shit, here we go.
Well,
when did you actually leave? When did you come to Australia?
80.
Or did you go to Australia? Did you come here from there?
I tried, but they didn't want me at that point. But they did subsequently allow me in. It cost a lot of money, and we had to go through lots of rigmarole with Dad's past. The minute they hear Dad was born in Sudan, they get all,
I don't know why, it's very black there.
Yeah.
They should like me.
You think we're supposed to be... This is the thing as well that blows my mind, is that we're supposed to be like, moving forward, we're progressive, and yet then we'll have hang-ups from things like you were just saying, you're born in the Sudan, so they'll be like, ooh, like red mark that. And you're like, so what? I didn't choose to be born there. That's one of the things I can't control. That was where my parents lived at the time. That's one of the things we still judge people on today. They'll be like, oh, but he's born in this country. You're like, he didn't choose that. That's where he was born.
Yeah, you can't take
first, didn't you?
responsibility or pleasure from it.
No. You can't. That's what I think about nationalism in a lot of ways. That people will get up and they're like, I'm so proud of this. You're like, you didn't do anything. You were just you were born there. Fair enough if you established independence for if you made your own new nation or something. But for people that are like Aussie pride, mate, it's like, well, you didn't build this country. You were just born 20 years ago. Like, what are you talking about?
Shaun, Cal was working in the hospital when they brought him in once.
Yeah, and
There'd be so much pressure. You can't even imagine.
Well, this is what's weird is that you're strong at the time. I never cried until I got to England and realised that
what you were in and what was happening.
Yeah, and what we allowed to happen, and
because at the time, I suppose.
Tell him about him coming into the hospital, looking after
what
you were told to do and say.
So you actually had to.
Well, he came in one time and he had a unilateral will do. But anyway, he had an orchidectomy.
What's that involve?
Removal of testes.
What?
Yeah, and we facilitated that, at that time.
That was a fact I'd missed in my research.
Yeah, well, I was there. I even remember the surname's name. It was Wicks, and we all thought, well, good that there can't be any more little Mugabes from there. But as it turns out, we didn't take out one. We did take out one, but not the. Because we had 13 theatres. It was a massive hospital, 1,000 beds, and you think Royal Perth is 240 beds. So we were a big organisation, and it wasn't run with doctors, because doctors pushed off for training overseas.
Yep.
So it came down to the sisters who'd qualified and the third years, which by that time I was. And what was I going to say? What did you say?
I don't know what you've...
you were just saying,
so when he came in...
Mugabe came in and he got one testy removed.
Oh yeah, he went on to have 4 children,
Yeah.
So it obviously wasn't, but both testes, obviously. Yeah. And those kids are living the life of Riley now.
I wonder. There was a speech that Mugabe gave where he was saying, and it was just because Mugabe was known for giving a lot of crazy speeches where he'd get up and go, and everyone would go, wow, yeah, that's amazing. And then towards the end of his life especially, he would actually say the wrong speech at a certain event and whatnot. But there was one time I saw where he gave a speech and he was referencing Hitler, and he was saying that if Hitler was so hated in Germany because he cared about his country and blah blah blah, then I'll be the Hitler of my country, rah 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 rah. And he actually shaved his moustache for a bit to have little Hitler moustache. And I'm just wondering then, there's that thing of Hitler, he only had one ball.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Hitler?
Yes, I've heard that.
Oh, I never knew that.
Mugabe trying to emulate Hitler in some strange way and going, I want to have one of my testicles removed as well then. And
yeah. I don't know. The only other time I actually was with him, Mugabe, was when he wanted to go around the hospital and look at everything. And being the third year,
that must have been
I was in charge, so I took him around, and we had his future Minister for Roads and Repair in one of the rooms of the hospital, and we had to go in with weapons pointed at us to give him medicine or all those weapons became a problem. I'll tell you one funny thing though. When a colleague of mine couldn't make it safe, I don't know what the word is, Dad,
put the safety on the gun, yeah.
So my mate picks it up, and we always had to take the backpacks because it might be lead to intelligence for our forces.
Whoa.
So but she had.
You're almost operating like counter-espionage and things in the hospital.
Oh yeah. And anyway, my mate ended up sending around through the roof, which she dined out on for many years. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dad.
Not really. I mean, I was getting on with what we were doing at work and being in the bush.
What were you doing out in the bush? Just
quite often nothing.
Yeah. A lot of waiting.
Yeah, sure.
Hurry up and wait.
But no, the police in Rhodesia were actually formed from a mounted regiment, a British mounted regiment, and so it was a police force that behaved as a regiment,
yeah,
right through to the end. But it was a very good police force. In fact, it was generally accepted that there were 3 top police forces in the world at that time. And one was, funnily enough, the Hong Kong police.
Which is also British.
Yes, yeah, and there was ourselves. And I can't remember who the third one was now. Yeah, it was a very good unit. And they decided to, and they had, from day one, from the day they first sent the regiment into Rhodesia, which wasn't Rhodesia then, of course, they'd left all the defence of the country to the police rather than have an army.
Yeah.
So it had all the the sidelines of an army and a police force.
Careful, Mum. You're going to drop it all.
Yeah.
Mummy, what have I said to you about both hands?
Oh, sorry, I forgot.
She's not
Sorry,
allowed to.
I remember. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. When you're ready.
Thank you.
So when did you first, if you were born in Sudan,
Yes.
when did you arrive in Rhodesia? Were
Oh,
you young,
much later. I went. I was taken to Britain when I was 5. My sister and I,
Yeah.
and I went back to Africa in Lord.
55 or 54?
It was. I think I got on the boat in 54 and got off in 55.
Okay.
Yeah, we had New Year at sea. Yeah. Yeah, and in those days it was the most beautiful country. It really was.
Mm-hmm.
Although it lacked a lot of things. It hadn't grown up yet, but you know, it really was almost a crime-free country, and everybody was pretty happy. And the relationship between black and white was very, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, you always got the guy that came out from Britain and suddenly found there were people he could shout at, you know. But generally speaking, nobody. I mean, I never had a key to the house from the day it was built to the day we left. And we never locked it until the very end. You know, I mean, you just didn't need to. You never took the key out of your car. It was a very straightforward, easier to live in country, and that was largely due to the African, not to the European.
Yeah.
But
Talking about regiment, Dad. Oh, sorry. Do you want to finish?
Go on. No.
We were also told we were part of the regiment. Us.
Were you?
Yeah.
Oh,
And-
we didn't know that, or we might have taken you into ourselves.
And it was just their way of saying you behave. They used to say we'll break you down in 6 months and rebuild you,
Yep.
and then you'll be the real thing, you know. And that they did, and to that end you had to be very smart, shoes very shiny, and we also had to wear a slip underneath our dresses. This was part of the rule. And we had to get into line once before going into theatre. There was about 20 of us, and I hated wearing a slip. Even to this day, I couldn't stand it around my stomach. And so my mate, we were all in line, like an army line. My mate shows herself, and then comes to the back of the line, pulls down her slip, gives it to me, and I put it on, so that by the time I got up the line to this woman who told us we were lower than dogs.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a harsh society.
Jeez.
But that's how I got through, sharing.
Cheating the system.
Yeah, and those friendships never leave you.
Yep.
There's so much wrong with war.
Is that something that's hard? Have you ever tried to... Was there people that you left behind
Absolutely.
in Zimbabwe? And have you
Yeah.
ever tried to get back in contact? Or?
Well, my sisters have. I've got 3 sisters, all younger than me. But for me, with post-traumatic stress, I try and shove things away just to be mentally...
Compartmentalise them?
Yeah, so that I can cope.
Yeah. Because I've watched, there was a recent movie from a few years back now that came out where a woman from New Zealand who actually emigrated from Zimbabwe herself, she now lives in New Zealand, she was trying to track down some of her school childhood friends from school in Zimbabwe, And one thing that they found since everything's happened is the massive breakdown in infrastructure, and the breakdown of everything has made it so hard to try and track down any information from back in that time now. Like, they go to the schools and say, you know, we were here in 1975 or 1981 or whenever it was, and all the records are just gone now. They've all been destroyed, and there's no way of actually trying to trace things down because of the way that everything just systematically collapsed.
Oh, thank you.
I think most of the civil recording is
I love this. Thank you.
is either dead and buried or it's been stolen. Oh, thanks, dear. Thank you.
What's been stolen, Dad? I lost you there.
The civil records, basically.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Because there was like, I mean, was it when Mugabe came into power was when he started doing some of the things, like he targeted the people that Joshua and Como was from, and they started doing a lot of those like targeted attacks on different villages and going out and massacring people and that. And you'd imagine there'd be a lot of them trying to disappear records and hide a lot of that from what was happening, because people were saying, like, you know, the Western world would look at him and be like, we've seen this happen before, like we've seen this rise of a person coming into power and then becoming a tyrannical dictator sort of thing, and everything falling apart. So you could see how the Western world and people in Zimbabwe like yourself that grew up there, you could just read all the signs as they're coming and just be like, this is not going to end well, I don't think.
No. And I know Mum used to say, because I was about 14 when when the first farmhouse was rocketed and everyone killed. What was I leading up to?
You remember Mum's.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm a bit shaky about the subject, so I'm sorry. I have to.
You know, that's the thing. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to talk about.
Okay.
You know?
Well, probably the fun thing I'll say is that Mum used to say right to Dad, if we ever have to lock up, we're going to leave. Not that we could just leave, because Dad didn't have a passport and I didn't. But then you pass that milestone. Well, if they start attacking inside on more than one border, we've got to leave. And then, now Dennis, if I have to carry a weapon, then we're going to leave. And so they
Compensating all the time.
Sorry, Don?
Compensating, is that the right word?
Yeah, sort of like, making you're pushing it back each time, going, all right, well now when they get to this town, then we'll do it. And because you're almost like you don't want to accept, I would imagine, you're sitting there going, really don't want this to be what's going to happen, but you could see what is going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't think the British could be as stupid as they were.
Yeah. That seems to be, that theme runs throughout history in a lot of places, I'd imagine.
Well, indeed. Now, I suppose it's a punishment for being a colonial country, you know. What you build up
Do you want another tea?
becomes your history.
Yeah. They have that with so much of the world, but that's part and parcel of, like you say, being a colonial power. When you have the greatest navy in the world and you're sending ships all around the world and finding new places, you're obviously going to have that blowback a few hundred years later when everyone's like, girl, look at what you did here and look at what you did there. And you'd be like, at the time we were trying to expand trade or whatever. Like, I don't think people at the time go into things with a bad intention to say, they wouldn't be going into Zimbabwe going, let's destroy this country. It was like you were saying, it was great when they were in there, and the police were one of the most highly respected regiments around because they have that hard British training put into them.
I've just remembered who the third police force was. It was the Canadian
Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So three of the British-led Commonwealth police forces.
Yeah. Well, all three were considered to be very, very fine police forces, although we were classified as a regiment.
So what was, when I suppose was that final straw when you went, all right, I guess we're going to have to get out?
Immediately after the election, I would think.
I think the election made us all feel that there was no security there.
It was an incredible day.
It started to show. And of course we'd been living under British sanctions for, I suppose, a couple of years by then too. which to us were a bit of a laugh because we could get round them relatively easily, but at a price in the cost of living, because everything cost us more money to put it in. You know? So so it became more expensive to live there. But it was such a very self-satisfied perhaps, community that nobody wanted to leave at that stage until things started getting bloody.
Yeah. Because they start then. I should be able to remember this, but I can't. But it was X amount of time after the elections that Mugabe put in his idea of like, we're going to reclaim the farms that are being owned by majority white landowners, and that was when things started to get really violent for settlers in the area, where they'd be rocking up in mobs going, we're going to take this farm now. And
well, what had happened prior to that is the farmland, or the unused land as it was largely, was divided into hunks of land which were filled by black Africans, and the other was land which was granted to qualified farmers. You know, people that come from many places, including Australia, and especially Britain. With farming knowledge, not African farming knowledge, but farming knowledge. And of course, they developed into a very successful provider of food for what was then Rhodesia, and later on for all the countries around us. And the first thing, of course, the Muntu wanted was the land. Well, we had, rightly or wrongly, said, well, you know, this is all black African land and this is white land. It probably wasn't, looking back at it, it probably wasn't the wisest thing to do, but something had to be done to make sure farming was beneficial. And not being used as a sort of a local foodery, but not building up areas and sizes of land that warranted export ability and all the
building
rest
up
of
an agricultural industry that you could export around to other places.
Two completely different types of farm. You know. And
were they shifting towards more that they wanted to be just like self-sufficient little?
I think there was it sounds childish, but I think there was a sort of an envy that the white farmers had big machines and things, but the only reason they had big machines and what have you is they were producing enough to make enough money to buy the big machines, you know. And so there was a definite degree of envy. I mean, one of my jobs was servicing the African farm people. I can't remember their title now, but and we were teaching them the basics of drainage, even, you know, of not wasting water. It's a bit hard to explain, but obviously if you plough a field from bottom to top, you're shedding the water very hurriedly. Whereas if you take it at 90 degrees, a lot of that water sinks in and becomes secondary useful. And we spent a lot of our time, not just surveyors, but also farmers as well, teaching Africans to
use those sort of practices.
And a lot of them did take to it, but then their mates didn't like it because they thought they were too pally with the whites, you know. So there was a degree of jealousy to it.
It's very tribalistic.
Because we had it wasn't a separate government. We only had one government, but that government provided all the needs of a government. According to whether it was the African areas or the European areas. And to some degree, whatever the era provided, no thanks dear, gave them more cash.
Yep.
And the idea was to try and teach, because their idea of farming was growing what you wanted to eat now.
Yeah, it's that old adage of like, give a man a fish, he'll eat today. Teach him how to fish, and he'll eat for the rest of his life.
That's right.
Show him how to farm, so he knows how to keep producing.
And storing and manufacturing and exporting, which of course paid for the whole damn thing. And that's why we became such a successful supplier of food to everyone around us.
I wonder if there's part of that, because Mugabe was so Marxist and having some of those communist ideas and that, whether that started to trickle down into that idea of the landowners, where they would, like you're sort of saying, a bit envious of the big machinery, and they look at that as that capitalist model, and they're like, they've got all this money coming in, and you're like, but that's because they're producing more, and they're actually generating the income so that they can buy their own.
I'm not sure how much of a Marxist he was actually.
Yeah.
I mean, he played the game to a large degree, but
behind closed doors,
yes.
I mean, something different.
Yes, yeah, he didn't really want to share anything.
Yeah.
With black or white. You know.
That guy that's taken over, Mnangagwa,
Yep.
he's just a clone of Mugabe's, isn't he?
Yeah. I think he is, and I think it
Speaks.
was absolutely natural that they thought that's what a leader was, so they get another one. Yeah.
Because he flew back immediately upon Mugabe's death to give a big speech and say that they need the state funeral and you'll get the hero's honours and all of that, and you're like, will he?
I mean, the most stupid thing when they had that election was in the African areas, the Chinese by then were persuading Africans to go to China for training, and you can imagine a lot of that training had to do with the rifle. So they didn't come back as good farmers.
They came back as war fighters.
That's right, and it was absolutely, totally impossible for us to provide safety for the ordinary Muntu. No, I mean, he lived in the bush. No, the ones in the town, okay, you could look after them, but in the bush you couldn't. I mean, they could go to a village and burn it down to nothing one night, and another village the next night, you know. And so the average country African was terrified of these people that were coming into the country with money and weapons. Yeah.
And what was the end game, do you think, from China then, if they're training these people up and they're...
Well, it hasn't ended. China's still very busy in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they build a lot of the roads and they do heaps of stuff to try and
they
get
did quite a lot
hand.
and the railways too, yes. They did a certain amount of good for the country, but with the wrong intentions, you know.
They play, because China seems to play a long game of like, they think 100 years down the track, and they're like, all right, this will be the century of America and the Western world, but that'll slowly falter, and the next century will be the century of China.
China, and certainly of China rather than India, which was the sort of nearest thing that they had to competition. But the Indians had learned to be very British, actually, which of course the Chinese never did.
Yeah.
That was the better part of the British.
That's why I wonder if like there's still, you know, there's this tension between Hong Kong and China now, still carries on, where they're just like, right now the Hong Kongians are raising the Union Jack still in Hong Kong, being we'd rather the Union Jack than a Chinese flag.
Well, they were very proud of what they had, and the British played the game very well, perhaps too well, and more or less left them to themselves. And they're intelligent people, the Chinese, you know. So they really could have made a much better country out of it. I think they've done well as it is. You know.
Is it because Africa's so resource rich that they want to get in there, because you'd be like, you know, they want their finger in the honeypot to be like, we're going to take a lot of these resources out of this area for our own
Oh, that's largely true, because they have a very large population, and they know that in order to keep that population happy and under control, they'd make sure they're not starving. Yeah.
They have a big emerging middle class that looks at the Western world like us, and they go, I want a big TV and a car and all of these things that the Western world just takes for granted, and now there's 1 billion Chinese coming up into that.
And quite understandable, really.
Yeah. But then that's what makes me wonder now that it's a scary term, that like resource wars are what's going to be coming in the future, as opposed to land grabs, where people used to be going, we need to go grab this land because we want this and that. Now it's going to be, we need this land because they've got water and they've got all of these
and
things.
all they want to do is run the economy, really. And so they get what comes out of it. Yeah.
It's almost an investment on their half. Or...
No, nobody, and I'm sure Australia doesn't do anything for nothing.
No, yeah.
You know, and the return they get is very, very large, because the people they're dealing with are not organised in the way the white world is.
It'd be interesting to see because he was in power for like 37 years or something, Mugabe, and now he's been out of power since like 2017. But the damage that's already been done in that amount of time will take decades and decades to come back again. Like I was saying, how Mugabe died in a state-of-the-art Singaporean hospital with all of these first-world amenities, whilst now his country doesn't have basic health care, can't afford to feed itself.
They don't even have medicines. They really are battling to get very simple medicines, because the prices are such that they bring them up from South Africa, and I suppose probably from elsewhere as well, but largely from South Africa, and they don't get anything cheap from South Africa.
And the utilities like water, all that's fallen to bits. One of my friends, Shaun Jeffery, his thing at the weekend is not to go out drinking, but to go and find water, and he fills a big plastic thing on his ute and brings it home and says, right, this is for everything. Toilet,
bathing,
cooking,
drinking, laundry.
Yeah.
Well, same with electricity, of course.
Yeah, and then, I was going to say electricity, they only have a few hours a day, don't they?
That's right. Yeah.
It's almost like it mirrors North Korea in a lot of ways, with like, it tries to project an image of like, we're independent, look at what we're doing and everything's going to be great, but if you'd go there you'd be like, where's the cars, where's the running water, where's the electricity, like it's just a facade they're putting on.
Well, I mean, they learn so much from communist run countries, and much of it of course was good. It made sure that people were fed and that sort of thing, but with that came control, and they will not lose control except by ruining the place completely.
What do you think's in the future for Zimbabwe over the next few decades? Do you reckon they'll slowly just try and build themselves up again from the ground up?
I think there will be attempts to do so, but there'll be no discipline.
It seems like they won't be able to do much without a lot of foreign intervention, like without China coming in and going, we'll rebuild it all for you, but you'd better do everything that we're going to say.
And they've done that. Mnangagwa has...
It'll be a question of we'll rebuild it, but it'll be ours.
Yeah.
Mnangagwa, hasn't he signed over a load of mineral rights?
Yes, inevitable.
Just in the short period, and the people hate him so much that he's actually it's difficult to find out where he is.
Yeah, he doesn't want people to know where he is.
No, and the average black Zimbabwean, well, they've lost their jobs in the mines, and
it harks back to that old like unions and gatherings of workforces to discuss things was the alternative to like dragging the tyrant out of his house and beating him to death in front of his family, because once you've got no food and you've got no water and you've got no electricity, people become pretty desperate to do whatever they need to do to make sure they can feed their family, and that's when society starts to break down and fall apart. And
Well, it is, and even the beneficial traditional society is just about gone now.
Mm.
You know, which was their best hope of that developing rather than breaking down.
Yeah, sort of
Yeah,
tried to go 3 steps forward and went 2 steps back in the process, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's very difficult to see what should have been done, because you don't know until you make the first move in chess what's happening next. Do you?
Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Oh, we could have done it like this.
Yeah. But the Muntu himself, the average African, is really a very, very pleasant character, very easygoing, and you know, the
Full
sun
of
will come
humour.
up, the sun will go down. You
Lots
know.
of humour.
Yes, a lot of humour. They love their music. They love booze, and you know they're really not bad people, but
No.
they're so easily misled.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I had help in the home as well, so that was very pleasant. Yeah.
It's so like it's interesting you say that, where I don't know how you'd think, because like they had a long history before any of this took place. Like there was great kingdoms in like Africa back in the day. Even in Zimbabwe, there's that big stone fortress, which is from like the 13th century or something back in the day. And they had big trade empires all through Africa. And then, you know, like colonialism happened, but I wonder what it is about like the psyche of them to be so easily led astray then by just other people. Like you think, why can't they just go, nah, I'm not doing that. That's an idiot. That's a stupid idea. That's going to ruin our interests in this, that and the other. But instead they go, oh, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And like a mob mentality takes over, and they just...
Well, I mean, they didn't even have the sense to resist the taking of slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they helped to colonize the next village and pass them on and get some money for them.
Yeah,
you know.
it's like a tribalism thing where like one group here will be like, I'll just as easily sell out this other group over here, I don't care.
And they made a lot of money out of that. People still don't like to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because Britain was transporting most of them, and there was a lot of money in that too. Yeah. So if you look for the baddies in Central Africa, you've got to look at some white men as well.
Yeah, yeah. But money can corrupt anyone, white or black, you would imagine. You'd be like, there's just as many black dudes that were going through Africa going, we could sell some slaves from this opposing village, and then white dudes coming in going, we'll buy them off you. And so the wheel of time just keeps turning.
Well, I mean, they must have transported that massive number to America. You know. But it wasn't just America, but it was that was the biggest market.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they became a problem in America.
You wonder where... Jack and I were talking about this the other day, which sounds controversial, but you'd be like, I wonder why all of the countries that England colonised became essentially first world nations, like Australia, North America, Canada, India, like places like this. And then you go, Spain colonised just as many places, but most of them went rapidly downhill afterwards, like South America and all these other regions. It's like England had something going for it, where they went around and they just like instilled discipline, and like would they teach, like you were saying, they teach people how to do it for themselves. They'll be like, we'll show you, and you then do it, and you'll take pride in doing it yourself. Whereas Spain like went around in like Cerro Rico. I interviewed a guy that went and spoke with these people at a mine in Cerro Rico, which opened in 1545 and was responsible for a lot of the Spanish Empire's wealth. But over 3 million people have died in that one mine since it opened in 1545. Really? So over about 400 years, 3 million plus people have died just going into this silver mine, because they just don't have the work practices that we have in the Western world. So the Spanish Empire was just like, we'll just throw bodies at it and just keep bringing us our wealth back. Like, but then that inevitably collapses. Like.
Yeah, well, Rhodes himself, of course, did do a lot of good things. but behind it all was the selfishness, of course. But he did have a love for Africa, and he did want to build the railway system from the Cape to the what do you call it? A little bit of water that runs round North Africa. Yeah.
Zambezi River.
Yeah. No, North Africa. Where, of course, the Suez now stands.
Oh, right, yeah, through the Suez Canal and that.
Yeah.
They had, because there was Rhodes and that, I can't remember the other bloke's name, but they had the two major corporations that were like I think it was called like the Africa Exploration Company or something like that, and this was like early 19th century and whatnot, where they would be going out and sort of like they just realised like the vast amount of wealth that laid before them in Africa, and they were all like, "Whoa, we've got to do something with this." And that was when they all started divvying it up and going like, "Right, we'll go in here, go in there, X, Y, Z," and then from that you can see how it went from two different paths that it could have taken. Where I don't think it's an awkward conversation to have, but you're like, they were never independently, some of these like African nations, they just weren't gonna get to the point that like Western world had got to by themselves, like with what they were doing, because they were happy being like which some people might argue was a better way. If you want to, like, you know, they'd be like, oh, that subsisting living, having your own little farm and just living the way you want to live, but you will inevitably be invaded by some larger country that will rock up and go, well, we can take this if you're not going to get together and make your own state. Like, whether you have this tribalism, which is what you would say the same thing that happened with when England came to Australia, and we didn't recognise the way that like Aborigines lived. We were like, oh, they've got nothing, they don't even understand anything. And it's like, no, they work in a completely different way. They drift seasonally from place to place, and they had certain... I've just finished reading this book, Dark Emu, which is about a lot of the forgotten sort of whitewashed history of what happened in Australia, where like there were actually some settlements that Aborigines had that were permanent, and they'd built up and they had sort of little systems of government going on, but it was just vastly different from what we as England knew as a civilized society. We were like, where's your garden bed and where's your meandering nice paths and that? We were like, oh, you don't understand. So we just see the resources that are available and go, yep, we can have that. And then you say like hindsight is good, where you can look back and go, oh, well, this could have gone differently. But I don't think there's any like intrinsic evil behind human nature when people just want, because we just want to go explore is where it all starts. Like dudes like Rhodes and that, they were just driven by knowing what was beyond the next mountain and what was beyond the next river and trying to find new lands. And then afterwards comes the politics of going, now someone needs to plant a flag here and say, who's this going to belong to?
Yeah, it really depended very largely on the honesty of the person concerned. Yeah.
And there's no internet back then to go, oh, hold on, I'll send you a photo of this place I've just found. Like, you've got to send a horseback rider to the next tram line and get the message back in 6 months' time.
Yeah, well, the original white postal system was pretty chancy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had that, and did you have, just drifting completely to a different tangent, but there was an interesting thing with the railway when it was being built, how like they had to deal with just like things that we wouldn't, it varies depending on your demographic, where you are geographically, like to the region, but lions and, you know, that sort of thing, the wildlife there. Like when they were building the railway, they lost like hundreds of people to just like a few prides of lions that would start targeting the railway workers because they knew they were easy prey. And did you go, when you were living there and growing up, is that something you had to think about? Were you like, oh, because in Australia we're brought up with like, you know, oh, there's redbacks and you got to check for this and that, and was there
No, I don't think it was actually. I think the relationship between black and white was perhaps too good. Very, very few serious writings came from southern Africa.
Yeah.
the serious problems in southern Africa were between the Dutch and the British.
Yeah, from the Dutch East India, the trading companies.
And the Dutch, in many ways, had better ideas than the British. In many ways, not in others, not in terms of trade and what have you, but in terms of making use of the country as it was, rather than wanting to change it too much.
Yeah,
they were very, very good, and they had a very good relationship with the Muntu, generally speaking.
Wonder why that is.
Even today, Afrikaans very often have a better relationship with black people than do English people.
Yeah,
very often.
Is that's
the English were very
superior.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of about to ask. I was like, is there some sort of aloofness that comes in with the Britishness?
The Dutch will dig his own hole if he wants to.
Yeah.
You know.
Whereas the British would say, dig me that hole.
Spare African around somewhere, you know. But the saddest thing in many ways was our invasion of the Cape.
Yep.
And that was a very, very, very sad thing for Africa. Completely. I mean, the way Africa was being developed, Southern Africa, that is, given time, I think would have been great. But it needed 100 years.
Yeah.
And it didn't get that.
There's a theory that's like, I read a book a while back it was about like geopolitical boundaries and that, but they were saying that there's such potential there for like a coalition of minnows, like all these small nations in Africa. If they could all come together and have like a united Africa system, they'd be so powerful. They'd have so much resources and so much military manpower. Like, whereas right now you'd be like, you know, Zimbabwe has got 5 jets and X place over here has got 2 jets and you know, this place and this and that. And you go, if you could all just go, right, let's put all of this behind us and go, you know what the real problem is that we were always segregated by someone else that came along and went, let's do this. Like if we just went, we're Africa and we're united, they'd have like a 2 million strong standing army and innumerable resources.
That would never happen.
But yeah, it's just never going to happen, right? That's what the idea behind this book was, is they were saying like there's no fear. There's fear that comes from China, there's fear that comes from Russia, because these huge, powerful global nations that have a vested interest in their nation succeeding. Then you go to Africa and it's Congo against Zimbabwe and this and that, and it's all against each other. So no one's worried. Everyone's like, no, they're just going to keep doing what they're doing whilst the rest of the world focuses on making their own empires grow. And
well, you must remember that there were 2 Boer Wars, and they were both called Boer Wars. But actually, they were invasions by the British. Yeah. So why they were called Boer Wars is open history. And the Afrikaner, or the Dutchman, had a very, very good relationship with them. Okay, they were boss, but it was still a very good relationship. You know. And the whole of that was destroyed in Southern Africa by the British taking over the Cape, because they wanted the Cape because they had their eyes on India, of course, and the sea route. And they hadn't built the
Suez Canal, so you still had to go around the Horn all the time. This is the thing back in the day. You had to travel around the Cape to get anywhere. So.
Absolutely, and even the Suez was largely thanks to the French engineers. Yeah. But British always took credit for that, of course.
I was going to say, just as an anecdote, nobody would deal with this because of sanctions, but Switzerland would, Israel and Greece. What was that? Sorry.
Swiss because the Swedes, because they're always so neutral and keep happy to trade with anyone. They're like, we're not taking any sides.
And they were quite right to take that attitude, really. It's nothing to do with me, you know.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, Harold Wilson, who was in power at the time in England, he still got his tobacco flown from Zimbabwe all the way out to...
That's one of the huge exports you would see in a lot of the documentaries that I watched, was just fields of tobacco as far as the eye can see.
In Wilson had a pipe.
Yeah.
So that was constantly filled. So what's was
With
said?
good grade Zimbabwean
exactly.
tobacco.
Even though he had
He was putting sanctions on the country at the time.
Yeah.
What a hypocrite.
Yeah. And anyway, so what they would do also is stash a jet with tobacco for him, for Harold Wilson, and then loads of meats. You know, because we had lots of cattle ranches in
And fly it straight to...
and fly meat. I mean, it was called sanction busting, and the Royal Navy was supposed to block, well, it did create a blockade.
Yeah, like a naval blockade around all the ports
around
and
Mozambique.
that. And,
and it became quite a thing, sanction busting, didn't it?
Oh, very much so.
I suppose, yeah, because
It
you'd
was a
get a black
business, yeah.
market for things that would just spring up, and
it's
dudes would be
true.
like, I can get through there with my speedboat and whatnot around the corner, and I'll go pick up X and drop it off for Y and make a bit of money on the side. And
Well, shortages always create profit.
yeah, demand. Yeah.
Yeah. It was yeah. South Africa was quite helpful to Rhodesia in many ways, but always on a personal level. Government to government, there wasn't too much friendship. I mean, their attitude toward the African was totally different to ours, and they, because of what the British had done in the Cape, the Afrikaner didn't have much time for British people, which we were, of course. Well, I was half anyway.
Yeah.
This caused an awful lot of the troubles of Southern Africa. They're still causing it. Yeah.
Just popping out for a minute.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
With they.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Wonder, I say, was there ever any sense that it could go a different way once Mugabe came into power, or was it always sort you could see what was happening and you were like, this is not going to end well?
I think there were all sorts of ideas.
Because they were so, like at the beginning everyone was so hopeful, you would have like for one aspect of it they were sitting there going, yay, we're going to get our independence and that, but then people that crunch the numbers are sitting there going, oh, this is probably not going to work in the country's best interests.
I don't think that was ever thought at all by the African.
No.
Never thought at all.
They were just blinded by this idea of gaining independence at whatever cost.
No, which period are you talking about? When the British were arriving, or?
No, so once they Zimbabwe or Rhodesia was becoming Zimbabwe, and Mugabe's sort of coming in at that stage. It seemed that everyone was so hopeful that they were going to get independence, but it seems that if you were looking at it from just a unbiased perspective, you'd be like, do you have the infrastructure? Do you have everything you need to become?
And obviously they didn't.
And they didn't. So no one saw that though?
No, I suppose not. I suppose it was hoped and perhaps even expected by many people that we would grow up alongside the local, what can I call it, energy. And the one thing the African had was energy, and we were happy to pay for that energy,
Yeah.
And the Afrikaans didn't have the same attitude at all. They, well, perhaps because they're not Dutch and not British, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to get their hands dirty themselves. The British, the British wanted the Muntu there because he would do all the work.
Yeah.
But the Afrikaans got his hands dirty. I mean, the Afrikaans built up mines, they built up farms, they built up all sorts of profit-making things, and this didn't suit the politicians amongst the Africans. The Africans wanted that aspect of Africa to be in the hands of Africans, which is understandable. Yeah. And I think that was probably one of the saddest things of all, the fact that the British had attacked the Boers, who were after all Europeans. I mean, we like to call them Boers because it puts them down a peg.
Yeah.
But in fact, they were very fine farmers.
Gives them a justification for what they were trying to do.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was, I think, just a funny, interesting fact. I think the Boer Wars, that was the first war that I think camouflage was implemented, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Before that it had been...
In the British Army.
Yeah, field greens or field greys and whatever, and then in the Boer War they implemented the actual splotchy sort of camouflage.
Well, yes, it wasn't so splotchy in those days, but it was browns and greens.
An attempt at camouflage.
Yes, it was. But, you know, it was very, very sad for the British forces because they were moved from places in England which were British Army bases and things, which couldn't possibly train them for Africa. You know, so they got out to Africa not knowing.
Taken from the moorlands in 10 degrees out into Africa in 50-degree heat in the...
It just, I mean, even the bloody horses were sunburned.
Jesus, really?
Because they used a lot of white horses, or greys actually.
Yeah.
I mean, they
learned by mistake.
Ridiculous, really. But it was so sad. It was so sad.
Just I mean, when you actually look at what it was, you go waste of life and a waste of animal and whatnot. But
and of course, when the African saw the Boer fighting the other white mob, they thought, well, you know, this isn't so bright. Even they could work that out for themselves, you know.
Yeah. I feel like we could talk for hours. But I guess we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah. Whatever. Yes, I should shut up.
No, that's it. I mean, I can happily sit here, but that's it. I don't want to take up all of your time and that.
Cal, he'd sit here all day and talk. So.
Well, I mean, Churchill said George Orwell was better than War. Yeah.
God, that's so true.
I think there's been a lot of sadness about Africa, especially Southern Africa. But the rest of Africa too has all gone through different stages of blood and guts, hasn't it?
I mean, it's the cradle of civilization, you would argue. Like, you know, out of Africa's where humans have come from the very beginning. So there's a lot of history going back there, and then, you know, some of us separated and went off to other parts of the world, but. It's still just that it's the fertile valley. It's that.
Yeah.
Dawn has taken them out because the grass is very green, so she'll pop them in for 24 hours and pull them out.
So good as a coloniser, it's because of their bloody weather.
Nutrients.
Yeah. You know, they all want to get out of it.
Yeah.
It'll happen soon, but you won't leave them.
That was I actually heard a similar joke like that where they would say, you know, these explorers would leave England and head over to Africa, and their wives at home would get a letter saying, "Oh dear, it's so horrible, it's hot and miserable, and you couldn't imagine."
Flies around.
Yeah, the flies are around. I've got dysentery. I might not survive. Really, they're sitting by the river somewhere in amazing weather and drinking some, you know, delicious beverage and writing home to the wife, going, "Oh, this exploring's hard business."
If
Rose
it was a mess. It was a complete mess.
Sue, I mean, why did I say Rose?
And even today, Southern Africa.
If she's coming round on Monday,
nothing to what it should
I would have joined you.
I mean, there's much more there than has been developed
seen her for so long.
Not yet. It's not what it could have been.
No. There you go. It's
well, thank you very much, Denis, Faye, everyone.
And obviously we do see it with a degree of bias, you know.
But that's part of
everybody.
It's a human existence. You can't be in a system and not be influenced by it. But as long as you're just telling it as you saw and how you feel it was.
But in that book, you'll see there was one instance where a chap in the reserve was on a patrol. They'd become very separated, and he was at relatively high ground looking down to a river, and he saw movement there, and so he followed it down, picked up the trail, and was following this guy, and he called in in Mundu, he called on him to stop or I'll fire, which he'd been trained to do. And of course, this African was scared of this guy following behind him with a rifle, and he just decided he wanted to get away with it. And because there was nothing to be gained for him, he just wanted to get out of it. And eventually, he tried to jump this river, and this fellow got his rifle up and shot him, and killed him. Now that fellow, who was a member of the regiment, was charged for murder.
Yeah.
Now, if we were such a bad bunch, what on earth would we be doing that? And I went to as a lot of my friends did, went to the trial. And I suppose we wanted to make sure it was going to be fair and it was. He was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of some form of killing, but I can't remember what they classified it as now. And given the chance to leave the country or suffer a jail sentence.
Yeah.
And this was totally wrong because he had no intention of. But that's not the point. The idea is the guy had been killed and someone must, And so he pushed off back down to South Africa. I knew his brother very well. In fact, his brother found the land that we bought for our house. Scotty MacDonald. And the whole trial was based on British justice. I mean, our government would never have charged a guy with that if it hadn't have felt it's got to follow the rules.
Yeah.
So all the stories, well, not all the stories, but most of the stories.
This idea that there was this blatant, this is all going on, right? And you're like, no, it's
quite wrong.
If it was, you wouldn't have had that trial. You wouldn't have had anything like that.
Well, did you mention the PVs, the protected villages?
No, I didn't.
Well,
no.
Dad said that these remote areas of black African were terrified of the terrorists.
Getting attacked, yeah.
But the terrorists used to say, if you do something with the whites, if you trade or have comms with the whites, we will come and kill you and your children and all that. So it was decided later, perhaps about 1978, to create protected villages, which the rest of the world, especially Britain, liked to say that we were doing another Auschwitz type thing.
It was a prison, yeah.
But it wasn't, because the gates were locked at night. They had to be in by 6, and they were unlocked at 6. The whole point was to keep them safe.
Yeah.
But the British would make this out to be us locking
imprisoning.
Yeah. But, so there's a lot of
there's a lot of deception going on.
And
one of the funniest things on that scale was when we had that final election, and there were terrorist gangs all over the bush by then. So many of them had been taken to China, trained, and come back again. And we said to the British, well, look, it's all very well having this election, but all your election points have got to be in the bush. They can't all come into they haven't got the transport, and anyway they're not prepared to give up time. They want to be growing their crops, and so it was decided it would have to have a number of voting points.
Yep.
And each of those would be defended by a British policeman. So they sent out this bunch of British policemen, which I, amongst a lot of my mates, went to meet. We took them to the mess. We gave them £20 each, I think it was, so they could buy drinks at the bar, because we thought otherwise we'd have to buy them all.
Dollars, Dad.
We camped them down for the night, or in many cases, people volunteered to have them in their homes, and we took 2 in, didn't we? And by the time they'd got those £20.
Dollars.
Was it dollars by then?
Oh yeah. You're talking about the late 70s.
Yes. Because yes, you're right. Yeah. Anyway, they all had this, and we allowed them the use of all our facilities, which included a very fine bar, a good snooker room, and most of the other facilities that services want, and we had to put half of them to bed. I mean, we had to take them out to where the tents were. We would line the training area up with tents so that they could bed themselves down.
Just because they're having too much of a good time?
Well, they had.
A lot of them were sunburnt and sick from the sun.
Yeah.
They just sat by the
That was
pool
another
and
problem.
got cooked.
Yeah. They'd come out with British helmets, which of course don't have anything like that. And anyway, I found our two that were registered to us, and we took them home. So I didn't stay too late in the mess because I had to take them home. So I didn't see quite what happened, but I believe they were drunk as skunks by the end of the evening. And you can't blame them for that. I mean, they had no interest in Africa anyway. And they didn't even know one another very much, because what the British had done, which I suppose sounds quite sensible, rather than sort of foul up the whole police service in Britain, they'd taken a couple of men from each station. Yep. So they didn't know one another either. Yep.
It was like some big school camp for them, sort of thing. They're all sent out on a holiday. Here's your $20 and here's your bloody British helmet and a rifle. Go over there.
I've still got two of the British helmets here. Hanging on the wall,
So that was not a free and fair election.
No,
obviously. And even you were shocked, weren't you? I mean,
yes.
We were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What we did in the end with these British chaps, who were all decent enough fellows, there's nothing wrong with them, but they weren't politicians.
Yeah.
What we did, we snuck a 303 into each of these places and made it available to them, because once you're out in the sticks, you've got nothing at all, but they knew far more baddies than there were British policemen.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was a very
you'd almost want to just blend in and not try and cause any trouble. Not that you can.
And by then our squad took over one village, and this was before the election actually, and there were two women there that had their mouths cut off. I mean, can you imagine doing that?
Yeah, that was the standard terrorist thing.
It's the most ghastly thing, especially to do to a woman, even a black woman.
Well, they used to cut off genitals as well.
Yes.
And make the wife and cook it and make the wife eat it. That's it. That came from China.
That's some Nanking sort of shit.
Yeah.
So the election could never ever be without
without
some sort of bias going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anyway.
And what was the ratio at the time
of
blacks and whites?
Oh, I can't.
Was it 22-1 or something?
You're probably right. I can't remember that.
That sounds about right from all the stuff that I've been watching lately at the time, like in the late 70s, early 80s, and leading up to when they gained independence under Mugabe and that. It was solid. But split.
You watch Mnangagwa is going to be just
as bad, yeah.
And although we cheered that Mugabe had gone, really,
if he wants to stay in charge, he's got to be bloody hard on the African population.
Well, because otherwise you'll just get a coup taking place like we had with Mugabe. Your military leaders and that will just go, we'll take over.
Because you know the 5th Brigade. Have you read about them?
Yeah.
You couldn't get
crazy.
We called them Mugabe's whalers.
Mm.
And
terrifying. They were trained by North Korean special forces and that, like how to do the most brutal things imaginable. Like,
yeah, you're right.
Ridiculous, really, when you think back about it. Mm.
Well, it is. I often think how I have a guilt feeling that I've had this 37 years that some of my mates didn't have.
That's a common thing, unfortunately, like that survivor's guilt sort of thing that carries on.
And I do have that.
It's hard, yeah. That's one of those things. That's like you were saying with the fireman that will go out and save everyone else's house, and then his burns down, or even worse, everyone else's burns down and his doesn't. And then he's sitting there going, "Why was I the only one that got
Either
through,
way.
and everything else went shit for everyone else?" But somehow you got through. But that's just the random roll of a universal dice where you just, I guess, there's not much, you know. That's what I like telling sort of these stories about as well. And it's so bizarre how, like we were saying, where you don't choose to be born where you're born. You're just born there. You don't choose to experience as what you're going to experience through life. It just gets thrown at you, and you either rise to the challenge or you don't.
Buckle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're all personality. Every one of us is slightly different.
What's that girl's name that we get a lot of intel from?
Kathy?
Kathy. Have you heard of Kathy?
Kathy Buckle.
Kathy. So she was the one. She remains in the country, and she actually was quite pro Mugabe initially.
Well, her father was more than a little. He
Quite keen on Mugabe.
He was a baddie, and in fact, we'd been told to keep our eye on him, and she, of course, grew up believing of her father's way it was the right way, you know. But today she's writing letters, and I think she's very brave actually, emails, and sending them to a number of people, including us. And I suppose we get one every couple of weeks or so.
Just
every
about
couple of
what's
months.
happening.
Yeah.
And
Sometimes I don't read it if I'm feeling down.
Yeah.
I can't take it. It's just all too sad for me, and I don't sleep well, and that. So sometimes, but on the other hand, she's gone to the trouble of.
She's put herself at risk.
She's put herself at an enormous risk, staying in the country and giving us real accounts of what's
on the
going
ground,
on.
what's
Like
happening.
the last one I read, she said there's a couple of black men, dead on the side of the road. Been there for bloody weeks. Nobody's removed them. You know, we get anecdotes like that.
That's so crazy.
But I don't know where she gets her courage from.
Us in our sheltered Western world, just being like, my internet doesn't work. They're like, I've had 3 bodies on my street for several weeks now. Don't know who's going to come and get them.
And there was another one with Sandy Jaff, where they were broken into. So Sandy, my friend, and yours, she rang the police and said, you better come, because they're breaking into my car. And he said, we do not have a car. You come pick us up, I will help you. And Sandy was saying, what do you mean you haven't got a car? We have a car, but we don't have wheels. No wheels on car. And that's how. And another thing that's happening is the long queues to the bank currently. And when they get there, sometimes they're told there's not enough money.
Don't have money left.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, they can't have Rhodesia. Sorry, it's Zimbabwe money. They can have American dollars, but they've got to pay one hell of a price for them. And it's so much so that all their savings goes in to these American dollars, which are overpriced horribly by the banks. And there are many of them are very close to starvation now.
Yeah, and imagine knowing it's your money behind there, or you've put money in, and you can't feed your kid because having stood all day in a queue, they close the doors.
There's no money left.
Well, I mean, can you imagine if you were told by the banks, which we're all supposed to admire, that you can't have Australian money, but we can give you American money if you can afford it. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be very bright to know that things aren't right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's going to end up in further tears, sadly, and the poor old Muntu is going to catch it again.
One thing I would say I've never really understood is you see the Greeks protesting and the French will go out in the streets, but with the Shoners, which is Mugabe's tribe, They are very peaceful people, and they might stand up and be counted now, but up until the last few years, they've been very passive, haven't they?
Well, they've always been. I mean,
And
the people of Bulawayo used to go up there, up to the I can't think of the name of the area now, but to the Shona areas to take whatever they wanted once a year. They take women, they take cows, they take whatever they wanted and go back to Bulawayo. That was how they sort of treated the African themselves, although they were Africans, but they were a much higher tribe.
So
In fact, if it was a section of the what's called it tribe,
RAR?
no, down in Durban.
Down in Devon.
Durban, that's it.
Durban.
Durban.
Yeah. You'd know them if I could think of the name, but I can't think of the name of them. Yeah.
Because Bulawayo was like the second largest city after Harare, and that was where Mugabe's dad ended up disappearing off to, and then left Mugabe and all of his siblings and went and found a new wife and had 3 kids up in Bulawayo and came back down.
Yeah, it was quite magic, really. But it was.
But how many were in that genocide? About 18,000?
I think it was 8,000 actually.
Hey?
8,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I knew there was an 8.
But of course, there's never been an official recognition of it happening, so there's no official figure.
No one would stand up and up against Mugabe, and I've never understood that. Never understood it.
Well, except of course that it was tribal, wasn't it? I mean.
Yeah, but I mean, even the Shonas would just get shot down if they were anywhere near his convoy.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying he was that selective, but he was selective as far as the tribalism of the area was concerned. And if you were a black man, you were assumed to be of that tribe, and that tribe had come from Durban.
Okay.
And they turned out to be much better fighters than the Mashonas. The Mashonas were a pretty lazy bunch, really.
Oh, they're happy, easy going.
Yeah, I mean, they're nice people. But I can't think of the tribe now from
That's the thing about Africa, it's so big as well, like, because it's blown out. We've got this misconception with high school geography where you look at a globe and Africa's, the big one there, but Australia's this big. You go, but you can't put a 3-dimensional planet on a flat thing without losing some of the size. And Africa really, in relation to other continental masses, is huge.
You're quite right. Yeah.
Africa is so big, and you got different ethnicities all through it. Like, you could find dudes in tribes way up north that are 7 feet tall and big men, and then you'll have pygmies in the Congo that are freaking 5 foot tall and live in the jungles and that. And you go, it's had so much diversity take place throughout it. You can see why there'd be so much tribalism of people just like, I don't trust those other dudes up there, and I don't trust these guys over here. And
well, even on our border, the south west border of Rhodesia, there were much smaller Africans. There was a much smaller tribe. Yeah, I can't think of the name of them either.
And then you'd see that it would just be natural that oppression would take place, where if there's bigger people in one area, they'd be like, well, we're going to probably take what we want from this other group over here. And
except if the little Chinese came along.
And suddenly they wield some immeasurable power somehow.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
I don't know if we've been of any help.
No, it's been amazing. It's been awesome. I was glad I didn't hit stop before, because that was some cool, interesting stuff in the last bit just there. So, but no, that's very good. It's awesome. That's just some interesting stories, and
good luck with it all.
Yep, I'll go through that and try and piece it all together. I think all it's going to be is it's just going to be essentially what this was. I'll just basically put our intro on at the beginning and just press play, and it'll be, if people just want to listen, it'll be a conversation about living in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, and just what it was like. But this will go part in part with our story episode, which is going to be the more fact-heavy history. That's what we do. We do one episode on every topic, which is like an audio book. So that takes a while to make, and that's where basically I just use all the facts from like the Wikipedias and different articles, and it's not any side story. It's like, this is the date Mugabe was born and he went to school at this place, and then this is what was happening in the country, and then this date he died, and that's just the story. And then what I wanted you guys to do is you can add that just personal experience of just what it was actually like living in country. So there's no like, I won't be editing anything and moving anything around. It'll just be as it happened and just the discussion. I think people will really enjoy it though. Like, I've enjoyed it. It's been interesting. So,
well, I haven't been a complete waste of your time, but it's been interesting for us too, just to have a chat about these things. Yeah. I mean, we, to a large degree, we try to forget the background, you know.
Exactly, we do.
And
well, yeah, it's been very appreciated that you've brought this back to the surface for a bit. So.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you are a reader, but if you...
I would absolutely love a copy of the book.
If you want to get onto the... what are the big book people? Amazon. You can get that in electric form.
Oh, really?
And the only advantage of that, the main advantage of that is the pictures and what have you were updated, because you could do so much more with it.
Yeah.
You know? So it's a better book. But it's still, the words in there are the same.
Yeah.
They haven't changed, yeah.
It looks like an epic tome.
Well,
it's a lifetime.
Some would say didn't know how to stop. Yeah. Well, we did a lot. I mean, you know, in 60 years of life, you do a lot of things, don't you?
It's good that you take the time to write them down though. Like, my grandmother's just done the same thing. I want to go talk to her. She grew up in England. She was a radio operator during the war.
Oh, yes.
We'd have to do the blackouts in London, and she had to get rid of her fence railings because they were donated to go make munitions.
Hack them off, yes. Yeah.
All that sort of stuff. And she's just finished writing her book, and you just read it and you're just like, man, we're such a soft generation. Like, I'm just like, we've grown up with nothing. We're just like, oh, life's hard. And you're like, is it really?
Yeah.
Try growing up in a country seeking independence or during wars. And I mean, we've grown up with this stupid war on terror, but it's not a real thing that affects us in our lives. We just sit there, we're sold this thing by the media. We're not being conscripted to go fight in a foreign country somewhere. We're not being given £20 and a rifle and told to go stand at a voting booth somewhere with a bunch of people being like, oh dear, oh dear.
Oh dear.
No, it's not like that.
So that's why I think it's good to tell these stories though, because like my generation needs to hear what the stories that your generation has to tell. There's so much so filled with like wisdom and life experience that people just don't get from watching reality TV and absorbing trash.
It wasn't all wise, of course.
Yeah, but it's good. It's got to have a bit of humour in there as well.
Yeah. I must say that for the British, they put up with a hell of a lot during that war, you know, and they could read about the Americans whose biggest problem was that they couldn't get white wall tyres for their car. That was what like Roosevelt said, and he was like, we're building refrigerators while our enemies build bombs. Yeah.
You know, they're just sitting there in this like naive existence going, oh, we'll all be alright.
Yeah.
And there you go. Wasn't that quite the wild journey? We did talk for another half hour, 45 minutes, but that was the end of basically discussing their lives in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. After that, we just sort of trailed off for a bit. But yeah, again, very, very grateful to Denis and his wife Faye and their daughter Cal and Janice for setting it all up. And I thought it was very worthwhile to just get a little bit of insight into what it was like growing up in an area that was directly under Robert Mugabe. So remember, this will pair with the timeline that's coming out this week now at the time of this being released. So enjoy, get your knowledge on yo. Hope you enjoyed it all. Love yous. Bye.
Officer has engaged suspect vehicle in pursuit. Confirmed. Pursuit engaged. All units be advised we have a pursuit in progress.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Stand by to assist.